I call the meeting to order. Since the last meeting, papers or notices have been put up. So on the 17th of July, the Secretariat put up a notice on LegCo's website inviting public submissions on this bill. And all district councils were also notified. The deadline was 5 p.m. on Friday, the 31st of July. As at afternoon on the 27th of July, the Secretariat had received one submission. The submission was referred to the administration for a reply, and members can also refer to the submission. The administration has also replied to LegCo's legal advisor, that's paper CP bracket 1956/2026 bracket 01. On the 17th of July, we raised certain follow-up matters, and that was a point about adding a preamble to the bill. The administration has also given a reply. Members can refer to paper CP bracket 1951/2026 bracket 02. So bracket 01 is the list of follow-up action, and then bracket 02 is the response. Before we come to the matter arising, we're dealing with the principal bill for the Northern Metropolis, and then there's also the subsidiary legislation. To give members more information to work on, in this context, members can also refer to the draft subsidiary legislation, which is the sneak peek. But I do remind members that we're not scrutinizing the subsidiary legislation. The draft is only there for members to refer to when we discuss the policy matters. It's also a chance for members to share your valuable views with the administration, and then the officials can look into the point and discuss the matters. When we concluded our previous meeting, many members were still lining up to speak for the second round. One member was waiting to speak for the first round. So let's resume the questions and answers for the policy matters of the bill. We will do 4 minutes per member in the second round. So please try not to repeat questions that have already been asked. When I say 4 minutes per member, please also allow time for the officials to give you the response. We will now see the list of members waiting to speak. Just to let members know the sequence, we will take first Mr. Ken Lee speaking for the first round, and then speaking for the second round we have Ms. Carmen Kan, Mr. Andrew Lam, Mr. Chen Xiu-hong, Professor Alex Fan, Mr. Wu Yingpeng, Dr. Webster, Mr. Lam Chen-sing, and Ms. Jody Kwok. Mr. Ken Lee, 4 minutes. I stated my view last time, so thank you. I did put my question in. We now come to members speaking for the second round, Ms. Carmen Kan. Thank you, Madam Chair. In the administration's reply date for the meeting on the 17th of July 2026, the administration said it would explore whether they could add a preamble to better illustrate the legislative purpose. After all, the Northern Metropolis is made part of our country's 15th five-year plan. The background and the object of the legislation are also set out in the legislative background brief. Setting out the information in the brief is one thing, but it's quite another to put the information in the preamble to the bill. So these are two different matters. I hope the administration can consider adding a preamble. For the dedicated legislation covering the 6 areas, I don't see any reference to attracting investment and companies. The legislative brief says that construction is in full swing in the NM. We already see companies coming in. We have to accelerate the work. Now, to meet the changing socio-economic needs, we have to consider the need for amending our laws and empowering such amendments for attracting investments. The policy address last year referred to tax breaks. And then there's also a bill on tax breaks for attracting businesses, such as charging taxes at half rate or as just 5%, and that's part of the legislative program. Those measures are territory-wide. So my suggestion is, of course, we welcome territory-wide tax breaks. When we want to encourage particular sectors to come in, for example, for the university town, we can look at places like Hangzhou and South Korea. They offer tax breaks or even tax waivers lasting years. So can we amend our Inland Revenue Ordinance Cap 112 so that we can empower the Chief Executive and Council to offer tax breaks in an effort to offer tax breaks? That will be better than amending Cap 112 in the future. Secretary. On attracting investment and businesses, the government has stated its plans to launch policy packages to lure different enterprises. Those policy packages can cover a range of measures, such as measures about land grant. Direct land grant is one option. This is administratively possible. The member also brought up tax breaks. That's also an option. We are amending another ordinance. Those measures under that ordinance will cover all companies in the city. But when it comes to taking full advantage of the half tax and or the other tax breaks, there's this framework within the government for reviewing the results. So the tax matters are taken care of under the IRO. For the Northern Metropolis, when we try to bring in enterprises, if a company needs a particular concession, if that concession needed is tax-related, we will grant a concession within the framework of the IRO instead of making subsidiary legislation through the Chief Executive in Council. Madam Chair, this is the difference. Policy packages cover administrative measures, and we draw a distinction between administrative measures and legislative amendments. That's why I highlighted the distinction. For tax breaks, we have to amend the Inland Revenue Ordinance. Without any delegation here, we will have to amend the principal legislation, meaning Cap 112 or IRO. Here, we are delegating authority to make regulation under Cap 131, the Town Planning Ordinance, and the Cap 123, the Buildings Ordinance. Delegation here for the CE in C will give them greater flexibility down the road. Secretary. The amendment to the IRO will come with a scope, and there will be delegation. So the relevant policy bureaus will deal with the delegation. So we will not deal with that within this context of the bill. Any further discussions can be left after the meeting. So we move on to the next member. Dr. Thomaso, speaking for the first round. Thank you. I'm not a member of this Bills Committee. I'm grateful for this opportunity for me to speak. I fully support this bill. I echo Ms. Carmen Khan's point. This bill empowers the government to fast-track processes within the Northern Metropolis. So we're granting certain exemptions from the restrictions on development, and those exemptions apply to the Northern Metropolis only. Several key areas are identified for the NM. These areas require relaxation of the existing restrictions under Hong Kong's laws so that we can fast-track the process. But development itself is not defined. In the bill, the long title says the bill seeks to facilitate the development of the NM. So the metropolis is there, we bring in the businesses, all that forms part of the development process. Are we only talking about the 6 areas? Or do we still need to drive development beyond the scope of the 6 areas? If those areas fall outside the scope of this bill, are we missing those areas? The dedicated legislation is supposed to allow fast-track processes for the NM. So all development related to the NM should be covered by this bill. That's my point. Secretary. Indeed, development of the NM covers many pieces of legislation. For example, there will be smart and green mass transit systems. That has to do with not just the NM, but also the urban parts outside the NM. The Transport and Logistics Bureau will have legislation just for the smart and green mass transit systems. Ms. Khan just then brought up the tax system. Hong Kong is an externally oriented and open city. Any change to our tax system should cover the entire city. That will be better than just tinkering with the tax system just for the NM. The member's question was whether we think the bill is good enough to cover development that can last up to 20 years. We're focusing on what is already happening now, that is construction in full swing. And we also see the need for relaxing the restrictions for cross-boundary flows. So we put the clauses in the bill for the needs we already see. We can not guarantee that we have covered everything. New development brings new needs. So we have to take a measured approach. If a new need arises, we do not rule out further amendments to the Northern Metropolis Development Bill.
Next, Mr. Andrew Lam. Thank you, Madam Chair. This ordinance provides a framework. It covers a few regulations and subsidiary legislation. The purpose of the bill is to facilitate the development of the NM. However, when it comes to cross-boundary flow, we understand it's applicable to the NM. That said, cross-boundary flow is two-way. As Ms. Carmen Khan mentioned in the example of tax, when some goods arrive into Hong Kong, these goods may be carried over the boundary. At least it concerns tax. In the principal legislation, well, I mean, if we are going to deal with it within the IRO, I understand the logic behind it. However, if cross-boundary flow concerns tax, in which I'm no expert, I'm expecting a lot of scenarios that may concern tax. And I believe the administration must take into account this matter, not just the Development Bureau. I'm not asking you to make amendments within this ordinance. Let's take low altitude economy as an example. Regarding the specified restricted area, say within the NM, when it comes to boundary control points, in low altitude economy, is it possible that there will be boundary control points that are not land-based? Regarding the co-location arrangements in the Huanggang port, it's actually not within the North Metropolis, and we may need other legislation to deal with it. I'd like to sort out the mindset behind it, so that we will have an easier time handling the subsidiary legislation later on. From the perspective of regulation or development facilitation, I hope that there will be sufficient flexibility in the provisions. Let me give you one example. Within the major framework, transportation, storage, use, there is no such word as disposal. Does it mean the subsidiary legislation in the future does not need to make reference to disposal? We need to tread cautiously. This is just one example. Thank you. Secretary. If I understand correctly, Mr. Andrew Lam reminds us just now that when we move on to the stage of subsidiary legislation, we need to make sure such subsidiary legislation will achieve the intended results, especially when it comes to cross-boundary logistics or the flow of materials. Tax may be involved. Just now, Mr. Andrew Lam also referred to the definition or the delineation of boundary control points. If we need to have new control points or when we need to implement tax concessions, there are other ordinances which we can invoke to handle these matters. However, when it comes to the four flows, especially for the flow of materials, in the context of the NM, the administration may have to consider whether it will have to deal with such matters within this framework or through other ordinances. I thank Mr. Andrew Lam for reminding us of this. We will definitely liaise and study this with the DOJ. However, we are not yet at this stage. The principal legislation touches upon four floats. There is no mention of the word disposal. We will study this. We will also see whether the existing legal provisions have already covered this word. Thank you. Mr. Chen Siu-hong. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just yesterday, Chief Executive had an exchange session with us. We need to adopt a macro and micro perspective. We need to have a big picture. We need to strike a balance. applying this to the dedicated legislation for the NM. Of course, I understand that the administration cannot make one piece of dedicated legislation that covers all the bases. We need to take baby steps. We need to take it step by step. And then going forward, if future demands or needs arises, we will have to keep making adjustments. This is one of our major principles. And this is the perspective I look at these pieces of subsidiary legislation. The NM will provide new development land of over 3,000 hectares for public-private projects such as public works projects, railway projects, public housing, and so on. We are expecting a surge in the number of development projects, hence the greater and burgeoning demand for manpower in the construction sector. That is exactly why we need to make sure there will be sufficient manpower in the construction industry. I'd like to know why there is no regulation providing for imported labor arrangement. We need to make special arrangements for a special case, and we do need to have sufficient manpower to expedite the development of the NM. Thank you. This is a question asked in the minds of many members as well. Secretary, indeed, when it comes to the development of the NM, there will be a huge demand for construction workers. So why is not mentioned in the information paper? Well, we already have an ordinance, employees retraining ordinance, covering all the matters mentioned by Mr. Chen. All the imported labor schemes have been empowered by the Chief Executive in Council. The CE in Council implements a lot of policies, including the imported labor scheme for the construction sector. So, given the fact that we already have a legislative framework, we do not need to deal with it further. We already have existing frameworks and ordinance, including the quota, implementation details, and so on. In the future, if we find it necessary to make adjustments, we will seek approvals in accordance with this empowerment. I do understand this supplementary labor importation scheme covers the power mentioned by the Secretary just now. That is, the CE in Council does have the power to greenlight this. Section 14, brackets 1, as well as another section that is 42, brackets 1 of the Buildings Ordinance mentioned this as well. For construction projects in the past, especially for private projects, there is no special arrangement for a special case approved by a building authority. In this dedicated legislation, it makes reference to prescribed or specified projects, and special arrangements will be made for such special cases. Likewise, for the supplementary labor importation scheme, the administration does have the power to approve certain applications in order to plug the manpower gap in Hong Kong. Just now, the Secretary referred to the supplementary labor importation scheme. It will allow the officials responsible to grant approvals with peace of mind. The view is very clear. Secretary, do you want to reply in brief? No, not needed. Thank you. Next. Ms. Julia Lau. The major framework talks about relaxing noise control. Actually, these details can be set out and dealt with in codes of practice. The aim is to provide flexibility in different situations. This will allow further tightening and relaxation if need be. We don't want the provisions to be a straitjacket, otherwise there will be no flexibility. Regarding the resumption of land, we need to factor in the area or the size of the area, which is based on the area of the construction site. There are usually differences between the actual size of the land in the new territories and the size on the plan. We need to have a standard or standardized area. We need to tally these figures, otherwise this will retard the development of the NM. We need to catch up with the international standards. Can title be uploaded online? This way, the public will not have to handle physical documents. They can simply handle these online. This is an arrangement that can be implemented by the LACO. Regarding land resumption, in the event of any disputes, of course, we will handle these disputes under the Land Resumption Ordinance. This will involve the drawing of the boundary. Just now, member asked whether we could take advantage of this ordinance to sort out all the matters relating to standards. I'm afraid this might concern sensitive topics or sensitive issues. I'm afraid this will be controversial if we lack any application scenarios. That is because we do not have any consensus right now, and this may further stall the process of the development of the NM. Regarding whether we can go electronic when it comes to the handling of documents or titles, I believe this has to do with the arrangements of titles, and it's not just about the North Metropolis.
Professor Alex Fan, thank you. On policy questions, I want to follow up on a point. This has to do with the Chotong land. Clause 10. The government is taking a more aggressive approach. So if the office of the manager does not fall vacant, then the compensation can go out, the land resumption can go ahead. My question is, can we go even further? Can we issue the compensation as long as there's just one manager? We don't need all the managers to be there. I'm also looking at Section 15 of the New Territories Ordinance, and this has to do with the clans and family land. So these families and clans appoint a manager. the Secretary for Home and Youth Affairs also has a role to play in registering managers. So if this bill is passed, and I'm looking at Clause 10, are we saying that there will be no impact on the new territories ordinance? So any document that is signed will still require the consent of the Secretary for Home and Youth Affairs. Will that stay the same? Secretary, our bill is only about dispersing the land resumption compensation. This bill will not affect the registration of managers and the consent of the Secretary for Home and Youth Affairs under the new territories ordinance. On the members, the question on issuing the compensation, on vacancies among the registered managers, can we disperse the compensation all the same? On that question, the views are divided. Some among the elders in the new territories prefer a more flexible approach. But then there's another camp. There are different family branches. Each manager represents a family branch. If we disperse the compensation to one manager while the other manager's post is vacant, disputes may arise between family clans or family branches, and the government will appear to be causing the dispute. That's why we make a trade-off. We take a more cautious approach. We need all the managers to be there. Our approach will also encourage the different families to fill all the vacancies for the registered managers, because in the future the compensation can go out as long as all the managers are filled. Mr. Wu Yingpeng. Clause 22 seeks to empower the Chief Executive in Council to make regulations for establishing statutory corporations for running different parts of the NM. The government said those statutory bodies may require funding support in the early days, and then in the future other channels of funding may be required. I support this principle. I see the need for early financial support. So for these statutory corporations, will the government consider including in the subsidiary legislation requirements for the statutory corporations to be run on a self-financing basis, so that these statutory companies do not come back for funding, which may put a strain on the public coffers? Secretary, these are the nuts and bolts. These are the details about balancing the books and maintaining clear financial accounts for the future statutory corporations. These are great points. When the government does have to set up a statutory corporation under the ordinance, and when we make the subsidiary legislation, we will consider the points made by the member. No follow-up? Dr. Webster. I want to follow up on the point made by Ms. Carmen Khan on tax. On the 19th of May, at the meeting of the panel on commerce, industry, and innovation, I attended the meeting as a non-member. We were talking about intellectual property. There were a few clauses on anti-tax evasion. The provisions are clear. And then the IRD inserted a new provision, 26C. This is uncalled for. That's what the industry thinks. Our point is to attract investments in businesses. The IRD wants to ensure tax revenue, so they are adding restrictions to make sure loopholes are plugged and there will be no loss in the tax revenue. I said then that there would be no loss in tax revenue because no business would want to come here given the unduly restrictive framework. There is no revenue and there will be no loss in tax revenue. Should we change the principal legislation? There will be certain arrangements in the NM, but that is not mentioned in the principal legislation, and then the IRD will simply follow their own ordinance and take a restrictive approach. So I wonder if this will be considered by the Secretary. And I want to look at clause 21.5. And this has to do with the transfer of funds across the boundary. A limit can be set in compliance with mainland laws. I want to confirm that this will not go against Article 112 of the Basic Law, which guarantees the free exchange of Hong Kong dollars. And when it comes to transferring money between Hong Kong and the mainland, so can we insert requirements that such transfers will not lead to an extra strain on the public coffers or extra compliance costs? Secretary, I understand the member's point. On the first issue, we want to attract investment in businesses, so we will have to ensure flexibility. The Financial Services and the Treasury Bureau is reviewing the IRO on ways to attract businesses. So this means they're looking at options such as tax concessions. Now we have people from the FSTB here. On how the IRO will be amended, that will be dealt with within the framework of that legislative exercise. For this bill here, when we say cross-boundary flows in this bill, the cross-boundary transfer of funds will be covered. Subsidiary legislation may be enacted in response to needs, but as the member said, there's a sensitive domain to this issue. Funds come in and go out freely. This is something we pride ourselves on. It's also our strength. That's why we're stating this clearly, that any provision on the cross-boundary flow of funds is not about restricting the free flow of funds. When we want to draw mainland funds to Hong Kong, we don't want our provisions to enable mainland funds to bypass mainland regulations. Compliance management is what we are doing here. We're not trying to go against the policy of free flow of funds in Hong Kong. It is a sensitive measure. We have to be clear in the language and the phrasing. Dr. raised a critical issue. This has to do with alignment of rules and mechanisms. We can dig deeper into this issue after the meeting. This is a point top of mind for many members. No follow-up. We move on to Mr. Lam Chun Sing. This bill is about streamlining procedures and relaxing restrictions. So exemptions will be granted under the buildings ordinance if there are innovative building designs. The administration said there would be a panel under the buildings department to vet the applications. Professionals will act as gatekeepers. The language is generic. It says, if there's a building design that is innovative, and then on grounds of functionality, the designs can be adopted. Aside from the generic principles, are there clear criteria that will be taken into account so that we make sure that designs we adopt feature both innovation and quality? I also raised a question last time about the link bridge and the closed area. For a breach of the law, the maximum penalty will be $2 million and 7 years imprisonment. The penalty is by no means lenient. The legal advisor wrote to the administration about this. The government replies that the penalties are set based on the provisions under the Import and Export Ordinance. My question is, from our experience, in what cases in the past did we pursue charges as indictable offenses? In the future, the cross-boundary flow will involve data and biosamples. Do those flows, or rather, will those flows involve possible breaches of the law such that the maximum penalties of $2 million in fines and 7 years in jail may be imposed? And will there be guidelines for people to follow the law? On the penalty, Ms. Linda So can take the question. For the bill, we propose maximum penalties of $2 million in fines, 7 years in jail. That's the upper limit. On the actual penalty, on the actual provisions to be invoked, that will hinge on the subsidiary legislation. As the member said, the cross-boundary flows may involve materials and data and other factors of production. Now, for the flow of personnel, we have the draft subsidiary legislation, and this has to do with the bridge in the loop. And we're going to impose the fine or the penalty we just mentioned. Now, we're designating the area as a closed area. This means when someone goes to the closed area without a permit, the penalty will be imposed based on the Public Order Ordinance. This applies to not just the NM, but to all closed areas. The subsidiary legislation does not contain the penalty we just mentioned. Any follow-up? Mr. Lam's first question has to do with the approval of the Buildings Department on special circumstances. Those circumstances have to do with not just innovation and quality, but also functionalities. There's a reason. Every now and then, we got views that companies looking to come to the Northern Metropolis belong to industries that are unusual in Hong Kong. Say some running the warehouse business look for a huge floor-to-ceiling height. So when a building design can foster the entry of enterprises, such designs can be a reason for the director of buildings to be flexible in granting the applications. Now, what about the criteria to be considered? There will be a panel under the Buildings Department. The director of building can seek expert advice on making the decision. Any decisions made in such a way will be posted online for the industry to follow.
Next member, Ms. Kwa Fu-yong. Thank you. We're on the NM Development Bill. I have 3 views to express. I'd like to follow up on our discussion. The Financial Secretary on his online blog posted an article. He talked about the fact that 240,000 units could be built covering a lot of area. I'd like to know how much demand such 240,000 units will be able to meet. Ms. Bernadette Lin attended a committee meeting earlier this week. In the third quarter of this year, a new measure will be introduced, allowing the plot ratio to be transferred from an older district to a new development area. I go along with this new measure. I'm glad to know that this will be allowed in the future. Upon the rollout of this measure, how will it impact on the development of the NM, say, density of the building's population growth? So regarding the measures in relation to plot ratio transfer, I'd like to know more about it. On attracting talent, one important consideration is housing for talent. Can we support enterprises that would like to establish a presence in Hong Kong? They may want to build accommodations for talent on commercial land. So how will government departments support this? Will assistance be provided to them in changing the use of the land? Thank you, Secretary. Based on our projection, in the coming 10 years, 240,000 housing units will be provided, covering private and public housing. This will cover a total of 10 million square meters of floor area. So how did we arrive at this figure? In the coming few years, some topside development projects will be divided. So what about the 240,000 units? How many years of demand can we meet? We will first project our land demand, and then we will actively look for land to meet our demand. This is how we project our demand in the coming 10 years. And oftentimes we talk about the long-term housing needs in the coming 10 years. Member also referred to the fact that some measures are nearing completion. They're in their final stretch. We're going to publish some technical memoranda. For the plot ratio that cannot be used in older districts, they could be transferred to other areas, including the NM. They may hold some land in the NM. Regarding the procedures, they will have to make an application to the Town Planning Board. Each piece of land comes with its own development parameter, including the use of the land. If one wants to change the use of the land, then they will have to apply to the Town Planning Board for approval. In theory, we provide more facilitation or convenience when it comes to the scenarios in the NM. So we are allowing a streamlined procedure. Applicants will have to go to the Town Planning Board anyway, but then the procedures will be simpler. Regarding commercial land, if one wants to build some accommodation on this piece of commercial land, if the plan already allows a small amount of residential floor area, and if you want to increase such residential floor area, you will have to apply. And you will also have to go through this procedure by way of the streamlined procedure under the town planning ordinance. We have already provided a lot of flexibility. There are lots of industrial park zones. You do not have to make any application in that area that allows talent accommodations. In other words, we have been trying on different fronts to make it happen. Thank you, Mr. Hong Come In. Thank you, Madam Chair. Land use can be changed by way of application. However, it is not applicable to certain areas. That is conservation area, country parks and greenbelt and so on. Some controversial areas concerns the precincts of country parks. Personally, I support development in fringe areas. That is because more land could be released. This will unleash the land potential of such fringe areas. Can they be used for further development? My next question is that the Town Planning Board can invoke the subsidiary legislation of the NM Development Ordinance to allow certain developments. However, they are subject to the Hong Kong planning standards and guidelines. So in the future, is it possible to go beyond the Hong Kong planning standards and guidelines? I support the empowerment given to secretaries of different bureaus, say for the Secretary for Environment and Ecology. He can publish technical memoranda when it comes to construction projects in the NM. Regarding cross-boundary flow, directions or technical memoranda can also be published, and failure to comply with such COPs or technical memoranda will lead to some consequences. I'd like to know if there will be consultation through the Legislative Council so that this will better meet the demands of different sectors in Hong Kong. Thank you. Secretary, your first question is about whether the government allows development in fringe areas of country parks. These are areas beyond country parks, and I believe we need to have the definition sorted out clearly. Fringe areas are not within country parks. Fringe areas are beyond country parks, outside country parks. So what is the land use of such land? Some could be agricultural land, some could be green belt. Say for the fringe areas, if they are a green belt, it is not the case that development is not allowed. That is not our policy intent. If we want to have development in a greenbelt area, we have to go through a more detailed and comprehensive town planning application procedures. However, if the statutory use of that piece of land concerned is agricultural land, if one wants to make an application for development, then that person in question can make good use of the streamlined measures or procedures under the streamlined town planning procedures. It is not the case that any area outside country parks could not be developed. That is not the case. Regarding approval by the town planning board, Is it possible to further relax the standards and criteria? This time round, we want to streamline procedures regarding the development of the NM. In fact, we have garnered support from the Town Planning Board when it comes to streamlining town planning procedures. If we want to fast-track the development of the NM, we do need to move faster. This is a concrete example. They are willing to streamline the relevant procedures regarding criteria. We will take into account the situation in the future, say for urban, rural harmony. The Town Planning Board may relax some criteria in the future. However, the overall principle is still streamlining measures and cutting red tape. Regarding guidelines and codes of practice concerning cross-boundary flow, we are willing to liaise with members as well as different sectors before we come up with the final decision. Ms. Linda, so do you want to add something? Yes. Mainly, we empower the CE in Council to decide on matters relating to full flows. According to the subsidiary legislation, codes of practice or directions could be published. This will remain flexible, so for future codes of practice or further directions, we will listen to members. It's my time now. Just now, members asked very good questions. I'd like to focus on law. Two questions were mentioned by our legal advisor. They concerned the basic law. Article 105 and 112. The NM Development Bill is something close to our heart. I'd like to see if the Secretary can answer my questions, and if you cannot provide an answer now, you can go back and study with your department. The flow of materials, capital, and data. I am expecting subsidiary legislation in the future. We are not yet in that part. That said, with the principal legislation, we have the overall framework. Against the backdrop of streamlined procedures, the CE in Council is empowered to factor in the prevailing circumstances and make further subsidiary legislation. This is close to the heart of the public. I'd like to settle this point clearly. The flow of personnel, materials, capital, and data concerns law. We need to better integrate into the GBA and together make contributions to our country. So regarding the interfacing of mechanisms, we need to provide good explanations to the public. The legal sector attaches a lot of importance to this area. We made the basic law to implement the principle of one country, two systems.
The next point has to do with tax matters. We have the law on family offices. That's under the Financial Secretary. And then there are other ordinances involved, the Employees Retraining Ordinance. Can we have an official keep an eye on everything? Now, of course, this Environment and Ecology Bureau is also involved given the construction noise permit. Can we get everyone involved? I see the Undersecretary for Innovation Technology and Industry here. Many pieces of legislation are involved, so I just wonder if these are all covered under the bill. Many bureaus will be involved. We have to streamline the procedures for all those bureaus. We need a cross-bureau approach. For noise, for example, that's already covered under the Code of Conduct. We're talking about matters at different levels, at the basic law level, at the dedicated legislation level, and then the subsidiary legislation, and also the matters falling under the different officials, including those under the Directors of Bureau and the Financial Secretary, and then we'll go down to the professional codes. As we scrutinize this bill, our officials should look into the matter and sort out the points with the Department of Justice. So that's my observation. A brief response will do, if you can. Over to you, Secretary. We're talking about the principal legislation. We put the provisions there. When the need arises, we make the subsidiary legislation in that particular area. On cross-boundary flows, we're talking about 4 factors of production. Those 4 factors will be the key players in the cross-boundary flows. Now, for the factor that has come to a more advanced stage, we are talking about personnel, and specifically in the loop. The same flow may happen in other parts of the Northern Metropolis that may happen on materials, data, and capital. Indeed, as the Madam Chair said, different policy bureaus consider their needs and then they talk to the mainland authorities. Each bureau does not work in its own silo and then come up with their own subsidiary legislation. There is already a mechanism, and that is the steering committee on the Northern Metropolis, chaired by the Chief Executive. So any subsidiary legislation related to the cross-boundary flow of factors are major issues, so there will be coordination at the steering committee. And then the subsidiary legislation will be endorsed by the Chief Executive in Council, and then the legislation will come to LegCo, so there will be coordination. Now, of course, there is the steering committee led by the Chief Executive. All bureaus are involved. Mr. Yu Ming speaking for the second round, and then we will move on to the third round. I have a question about the conservation areas. The government stressed that streamlining the procedures will not come at the expense of the conservation areas. But the development may cut into conservation areas. Of course, there are town planning processes, so a conservation fund may be set up, but then the thresholds are high, huge fees are involved. So when the land cuts across conservation areas, what do we do? Can we take a more lenient approach? Can we do something so that we don't see a lengthy process and huge expenses for the conservation funds? I also want to discuss the Chotong land. The bill says that you need the consent of all registered. Originally, everyone has to agree for the compensation to go out, and then with the change, we simply need the consent of the registered managers. But then in a small number of cases, the compensation goes out. So does the money go to the registered manager personally? Are there ways for us to make sure that the manager does not misappropriate the money? We give the full control to the manager, and then the manager may do as they like with the money. So can the government explain this point? On the compensation for resuming Chotong land, let's first assume all the managers are there. We disperse the compensation. How will they pay out work? That question will go to the lands department. On the first question, conservation areas. If there are future applications involving a site, say the applicant wants to merge the agricultural site and the greenbelt site, so part of that will have to do with the conservation area, because greenbelt sites are conservation areas. We're not banning such proposals. The applicant will simply have to go through the lengthier process, that is the town planning process. The streamlined procedure will apply to the agricultural site. But if the development involves the conservation areas, the lengthy process will kick in. So we're not banning such proposals. We're simply saying that any application involving a conservation area will have to go through the lengthier process. Now, the Lands Department will comment on the compensation issue. Now, for compensation for resuming Chotong land, the compensation will go to the Chotong. On how the compensation money will be spent, that is left to the Chotong involved. Any follow-up? We now come to the third round. 3 minutes for each member. A reminder to members again, we're talking about policy matters. The administration provided relevant information for members' preview, and that includes the draft copies of the subsidiary legislation. Members can preview the copies as a point of reference for the discussion and comment. So we now come to the third round of questions. 3 minutes, question and answer inclusive for each member. Ms. Carmen Khan. The policy discussion is a valuable session. The government started talking about dedicated legislation last year, so we have to discuss how much of a piece of dedicated legislation this is. The Northern Metropolis is part of the 15th five-year plan, and we want to get everything right with the university town and other parts of the NM. I attended a meeting of the panel on development as a non-panel member. I asked the secretary how we can achieve the goal. Can we use the Henry VIII clause's meaning? We put a provision in the principal legislation. The secretary said back then that the principal legislation will make it clear that within a clearly defined scope, the subsidiary legislation will be amending certain primary legislation. I wonder if this approach is reflected in the bill. This approach can truly reflect the executive-led model to meet the needs of the Northern Metropolis. Market players have high expectations of the NM's development. As Mr. Chen Xiuhong said yesterday at the dialogue with the chief executive, Mr. Li mentioned the systems thinking and LegCo as a partner in reform. I hope the secretary will bear with me. We want to be good partners with the executive branch. Let's see if there is scope for us to deliver what the market expects. So my question is about Henry VIII clauses. How are those clauses reflected in the ordinance? The point about Henry VIII clauses is a point related to legal matters. The point was raised back then in connection with the concern from Ms. Carmen Khan. If we keep the principal legislation to the bare bones and then the details are set out in the subsidiary legislation, the question was, would that give rise to a situation where the subsidiary legislation ends up amending the principal legislation? Given our goal to streamline procedures and relax restrictions, we did say that we obtained legal advice. Normally, we would not amend principal legislation with subsidiary legislation, but the legal advice was that in certain cases this approach would be justifiable. And then we thought through this legal advice. Again, we sought further legal advice on the point. We decided on a prudent approach. If we want to amend existing ordinances through the bill, we will do so through the principal legislation. For example, the town planning ordinance, we will be amending the TPO. That's because we will introduce a streamlined process. That will be reflected in the principal legislation. We even spell out the specific provisions that will prevent dispute down the road. We want to play safe. This is the first piece of dedicated legislation for the Northern Metropolis. We want to ensure safe implementation, so we have thought things through. A few months ago, we briefed members on the bill. Now you see the bill as a text that is longer than what we briefed members on. Other members, such as Dr. Webster, Mr. Andrew Lam, and Mr. Chen Xiu-hong, made the same point. The Secretary called this a more prudent approach. In that spirit, we should think about what ordinances may be involved. Again, as the Chief Executive said, we have to adopt the systems thinking. We have to think about the general and the specific. So we adopt the principal legislation to amend other ordinances. How about we go into the specifics, meaning we set out the specific ordinances we want to amend: Cap 131, Cap 123, Cap 400, which is about noise pollution. And we want to attract enterprises and investments. So we have to think about the ordinances we have to amend, such as Cap 112, and also the employees retraining ordinance. So why don't we specify the prevailing ordinances that may be amended? You first need LegCo to empower the government to do something, and then the case can stand up in court. That's why we're saying we should set out the ordinances that will have to be amended with the authority of the Chief Executive in Council. So I will just stop here to save everybody's time.
Ms. Carmen Khan's view or question may concern other legislation. I believe we can ask the Secretary to go back and study this point. You have already heard Ms. Carmen Khan's point. At this stage, there are limitations when it comes to the NM Development Bill, and I understand regarding statutory organizations, you can go back and study this point. It's difficult for the Secretary to give us any reply right now. If the Secretary wants to reply in brief, please. Thank you. We do understand the good intentions of Ms. Carmen Khan. The contents of the bill have been thought over by us. We have already liaised with different policy bureaus regarding what they can expect or project in the future. If you can expect or project something that you might need help with, you can let us know and we will incorporate it into the bill. We have indeed bounced ideas off different policy bureaux. Just take the employees training ordinance as an example. If in the future we're going to import labor or import workers, do we need to set it out clearly here? We asked our legal advisor. The answer is no. We already have existing legislation. That being said, we can definitely go back to study this again, but I don't see that that will give rise to any new areas on which we will have to work. Just now I've given Ms. Carmen Khan more time, but I hope the members will keep your speech to your time limit. Mr. Andrew Lam. Just now we heard very clearly about the position of the government. This principal legislation or framework needs to have sufficient flexibility, be it from the perspective of development or oversight. The example I gave you just now is the word disposal. We have now moved from amending the whole plan to just working on the planning permission or the planning permit. That is indeed good. If I understand correctly, when you amend the plan, whatever the use it is, you can add new use, and you are not bound by either column 1 or column 2 uses. It's just a different route you take. You are not bound by column 1 or column 2 uses. However, when it comes to actual regulation or oversight, we're bound by interpretations of certain terms. That is, what does industrial use mean? What does agricultural use mean? I'd like to take this opportunity to ask departments to review the scope or the definition of such words. These terms should be interpreted from a wider perspective. Otherwise, there might be a lot of difficulties or scenarios which we might not be project at this moment, especially in the realm of innovation and technology. So I hope that the government will go back and study this point further. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, member, for your view. We definitely work on it. We are actually already working on it, but just not on the Northern Metropolis. Say we have a measure. We have already got a wider definition of the word hotel. Hostels are covered under hotels as well. Can we have a wider or can we have a wider definition? So I believe this is applicable, and we will follow up on it, just like the case Mr. Andrew Lam mentioned, the hostels in the city scheme. Mr. Andrew Lam, I'd like to give you one more example. It's not directly related though. We are using the phrase or the word whitelist regarding the flow of personnel. I'm not against it. But is the word whitelist the only choice we have? Can we use blacklist? That is a negative list. Madam Chair encourages us to ask questions on policy matters regarding subsidiary legislation, so I do not want to be bound by just one single choice of the word whitelist. Thank you. Mr. Andrew Lam asked very targeted, specific, concrete questions. If members have any questions or views on the draft of the subsidiary legislation provided by the government, I encourage you to relate your view to the administration. Please do so as soon as possible. Thank you. Next, Mr. Chen Siu-hong. Thank you, Madam Chair. Paragraph 27 and 28 of the information papers provided by the government said that the first batch of subsidiary legislation will handle the flow of personnel in the relevant technology park. The industry has been waiting for a long time for contactless customs clearance. The industry park is the wholly owned company of the Hong Kong Technology Park Company Limited. The flow of personnel is dynamic. There will be changes on the whitelist anytime. So I'd like to know what level in the industrial park can make such decisions. How can the government or the relevant departments across the two places to be a good gatekeeper? Thank you. I'd like to ask my colleague Ms. Lillian Chong from the ITIB to respond. Thank you. I'd like to ask Ms. Vicky Zhang to take this question. This subsidiary legislation concerns the special boundary control point, that is the operation of the closed area. It sets out clearly that the Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation and Technology Park, that is HSITP for short, can make an application for the list. We do have a mechanism to decide on what level of staff members can handle this. This subsidiary legislation has to do with a framework including application approval and handling of applications. The park has the power to reject the application or to remove the application of those not eligible. The company is responsible for making approvals regarding the personnel on the list. However, after all, this is a boundary control point, so it will be the relevant government department who will keep the gate eventually. This special port isn't just about Hong Kong. It also concerns the Chinese mainland. We have the principle of one area or one zone, two parks. we worked together with the Shenzhen Park to come up with this list. So for the categories of subsidiary legislation, we do have a mechanism to interface with Shenzhen. It provides for exchanges in the future. Thank you. Mr. Chen, I'd like to follow up. I'd like to confirm my understanding is correct. The company is empowered to manage the whitelist. It's clear. However, does the park have the power to approve the whitelist? Say for the relevant operators or managers, these are quite concrete ranks. After all, do we need the confirmation or the consent of the governments of the two places regarding what could be or who could be on the list, on the white list? Thank you. Please speak into the mic, Ms. Lillian Chong. Thank you. We do have a system from the perspective of the mechanism. There is an application manual or guideline. Only the 4 categories of person can make an application, and the park company will also be responsible for gatekeeping. They can either approve or reject. Applicants need to provide relevant proof such as identity proof or proof that they have to do with the development of the park or they work in the park and they do need to go to the park often for work. The park has a consultation mechanism with the government. And there will also be a mechanism to make sure which applications will be approved or rejected. We work together with the government of the Shenzhen side. Eventually, for these 2 mechanisms, there will be an interfacing mechanism regarding documents for application, approval, and so on. I'm allowing the 4th round. Well, Madam Chair, can I continue though? I'm happy with the answer given by the Undersecretary. However, we often say that when people come to the industry park for a meeting and if approval takes a week or even a month, it goes against the principle of providing facilitation for personnel to move across the boundary or to go to the relevant park easily. Can we expedite the approval time? Say within 24 hours, the application will be approved. I hope there will be further codes of practice or subsidiary legislation setting out the relevant details to make sure that the personnel can go to the relevant park easily. Thank you.
A response? Ms. Vicky Chen. Mr. Chen is in the right direction. We did talk about this matter with the Shenzhen side, so someone may need to attend a conference in the park. They're not a frequent traveler, so someone who is there on ad hoc business, there will be an application channel. There will be a way to deal with that and to expedite such applications. So such arrangements will be in place. The speaker is not speaking into the microphone. Her mic is off. So it's important that questions are answered. It's a question shared by many. I'm pleased to see there's a response. Dr. Webster and a few other members will be speaking for the third round. So as we do future rounds, you will have less time each round. I see the questions are very specific. Some have to do with the language, others have to do with the policy. So we should take this opportunity for the administration to receive the views and then answer the questions. Dr. Webster. 21.6a and b. It's about the delegation for cross-boundary flows. So there will be indictable offenses, summary offenses, a maximum fine $2 million, 7 years imprisonment. I do not propose to go into that again. Cross-boundary flows cover people, materials, capital, and data. I don't see the penalty levels in the principal legislation. Do we have similar examples in local cases and overseas cases? I'm looking at Enclosure E, Paragraph 8, or Annex E, Paragraph 8. So the point is about deterrence rather than revenue. That's what the fine is all about. But if we're too lenient with the fine, the penalty will be powerless. If we're being too restrictive with the fine, we deter investment. Can we have a tiered approach to the fine instead of a one-size-fits-all approach? Now, on the 4 flows, a member mentioned the white list, and then the government said they would try to set up a pilot and they talk to the mainland. We built in the flexibility in the principal legislation. For each kind of factor of production, do we have a cost-benefit analysis and key performance indicators for each kind of factor of production? Secretary. Secretary, can you speak into the microphone? On the penalties, the director of the NMCO will give a reply on that. On the 4 factors of production, since we don't have the subsidiary legislation yet, we propose that when there are trials involving cross-boundary flows, involving, say, materials and data, we're talking about purely trials. Administrative agreements will do, so those parties can think about how to try out the scheme. On whether we will have key performance indicators, and when we come to the regulation, whether the trials will be a basis or a point of reference. So we will work with the relevant bureaus on that. Now, for the flow of personnel in the loop, there will be an arrangement. We don't have concrete regulation or frameworks for other parts of the NM. So we will first see what pilots there are, and then we will brief members on what we do about the other parts. Ms. Linda So. On the penalty clauses, now in the principal legislation, we propose a maximum fine of $2 million and 7 years imprisonment. That's the maximum penalty. This is not to say that the penalties will be 7 years imprisonment and $2 million in fines. The future subsidiary legislation can set penalties up to the level. They can set a lower penalty, but they cannot exceed the level set out in the principal legislation. Now, on the cross-boundary flows, there are 4 factors of production, and within each flow there may be final distinctions on whether fines or other penalties will apply, to what extent do we apply the penalties, how the penalties will work. All that will hinge on the subsidiary legislation. For personnel, for example, things are at a more advanced stage. So for the loop, we do not propose to impose the fine I just mentioned, because that area will be subject to the public order ordinance. On the 3 other factors of production, the final points will be set out in the subsidiary legislation. when we said the maximum penalties, we have referred to the Import and Export Ordinance, which deals with smuggling. And that is more similar to what we have here, which is about cross-boundary flows. That's why we referred to the Import and Export Ordinance in setting the maximum penalties. Mr. Lam Chen-sing. In the government's reply to the legal advisor, I see that for future cross-boundary flows of biosamples and data, there will be codes of practice. The consequences for breaching the code will be set out in the subsidiary legislation, but the code will not be subsidiary legislation. I get that. But what about the format of the future code of conduct? Those codes can take different forms. Some codes are prepared by the industry. Other codes are issued by the government, meaning they're issued by relevant departments. Some codes have a higher legal status, so for basic housing units, there is a code of practice. Any change to such a code will require a notice to be published in Gazette so that the public will know. So, what status will the future code of practice have? So maybe a copy of the code will have to be forwarded to the Legislative for discussion. I also have another policy question. Now, for the future boundary control point, maybe we have plans. I just wonder, maybe there will be contactless clearance. Will this be like the practice at Chongying Street in Shuttlecock, or will we have more cutting-edge technologies? I'm also on board with Mr. Chen Xiuhong. For the future whitelist, we should not be unduly restrictive. We should not restrict access only to employees of companies. There may be people attending conferences, people going there for visits, for study tours. Can we issue day passes or pass over 3 days? Can we do electronic applications and vetting? I get it. We have to talk to the mainland government about this. I'm just floating some suggestions. Thank you. The Secretary. On codes of practice, now we have provided the preview version for the flow of personnel. On the 3 other factors of production, do we have a framework for such code? How detailed will the code be? We don't have information on that yet. We do note the members' suggestions. When we come to that stage, when we have the codes, and the code aid the implementation of the regulation, we will be happy to take members through the code and we will welcome members' views on that. On personnel, there will be a new BCP in the loop. We want to adopt the latest clearance model. When appropriate, relevant department will provide information on the arrangement. Mr. Hong came in. Thank you. I have questions about land. The Secretary, in her reply to Mr. Yu Ming's question, said that when the land of an application involves agricultural land or greenbelt site, applications to the town planning authorities will be needed. My concern is that the town planning process takes too long. Can we empower a more senior official like the Secretary or the Chief Executive to take more actions? For land development, the land may involve the periphery of country parks. This element may delay the process, and then time is wasted. So we should be more flexible with land. That will allow greater flexibility in the future development of the NM. Now for the loop, you have the Shenzhen River in the middle. There will be a bridge spanning the river. It's a quick walk across the bridge. How do we make the most of the Shenzhen River to facilitate access to the area? The Shenzhen River may also be the site for trialing technologies. I don't see any reference or discussion of the Shenzhen River in the papers. I wonder if any information can be shared on this point. On applications about land to the DEVB and changing the parameters, that process is statutory in nature. Some years ago, with the assistance of LegCo, we passed an omnibus bill to streamline the procedure, including the town planning process. A lengthy process has now been reduced to 9 months when it's a rezoning process. For the Northern Metropolis, we propose to slash that process from 9 months to 2. That will apply to non-conservation areas. The members' concern is that even with this new procedure in place, a case may be stuck somewhere in the process. So what do? We already have a mechanism. For the Northern Metropolis, we are leaving aside public works projects, because for public projects, government departments are in charge. For the private projects, when it comes to building plans, land development, under the Development Bureau, there is a project office. The permanent secretary for Development, Planning and Lands leads the project facilitation office. When a case is stuck for weeks, the case is either accepted, approved, or rejected, or input is required. When the case is stuck, this project office intervenes. Whether the project is approved or rejected, an answer will be given sooner. On the water body, meaning Shenzhen River, whether there is scope for creative use of the body of water. Honestly, we haven't come to the point of thinking about how we make the most of the Shenzhen River. We often talk to the Shenzhen side about managing the river. This is about flood control and ensuring water quality. But I get the members' point. The body of water may serve future functions. We note the members' comment about Shenzhen River. I want to put this on the record. Members brought up Article 112 and 105 of the Basic Law. For the dedicated legislation, the principal legislation and the subsidiary legislation are in line with the Basic Law. Article 112 of the Basic Law states that the HKSAR will adopt a free currency and currency exchange policy. So I'm on board with the Secretary. This is a key part of Hong Kong's competitiveness. On cooperation with the mainland, this will involve alignment of regulations and interfacing of mechanisms. So the mainland side is involved. Of course, on the Hong Kong side, we would like to see more liberalization. But we're talking about two jurisdictions. And when we come to management matters, communication will be crucial. Members can continue to provide comments. But when it comes to the interfacing of mechanisms, we have to be mindful that we cannot change the mainland's laws. It will take time and it will only be a matter of time for freer flow of funds in the GBA. This is perfectly in line with Article 112 of the Basic Law on land resumption. Article 105 of the Basic Law is clear on this. We're developing the Northern Metropolis. Compensation is crucial when we resume land, so that the compensation corresponds to the real value of the property. When the government resumes land, it provides compensation, and communication will play a key part in the process. So I think the bill is in line with the Basic Law. The same goes for the subsidiary legislation. I also want to make one more comment. Mr. Andrew Lam, Mr. Chen Xiuhong, and other members also asked specific questions. The white list will involve legal terminologies from the mainland laws, where the white list is commonly used. Now, on the implementation, we all know what the white list is. When it comes to terminologies, after all, Hong Kong has a common law system. Now, when it comes to the penalties, as Dr. Webster mentioned, we are clear on this because we know these are the maximum penalties. Now, people outside Hong Kong and also mainland investors will read our legislation. That means guidelines may be needed in the future given the difference in the legal systems. People see the tough penalties. We take a progressive approach in court. We all know that the penalty will be commensurate with the offense, but for an outsider, they wonder if the maximum penalty will be applied every time. So, precision in terminologies will be needed. Guidelines may be needed. That's for the government to follow up on.
In the fourth round, 2 more members are lining up to speak. If necessary, we can extend this meeting by 15 minutes. I want members to ask questions that they want to ask before we move on to clause-by-clause examination. I'm also expecting the administration to be ready when it comes to clause-by-clause examination, and the administration will be willing to take questions from members while we are going through the subsidiary legislation. At this moment, a total of 4 members are lining up to speak in the fourth round, 2 minutes each. Let's start with Ms. Carmen Khan. Thank you. Madam Chair, if you agree, I hope that we can follow up with the administration regarding what administrative means do we need to handle some policies, say the employees training ordinance. With the consent of the CE in Council, they have been endorsed so that you do not need to endorse the CE in Council regarding subsidiary legislation or principal legislation. However, the Inland Revenue Ordinance is another matter. This dedicated NM ordinance will no longer be dedicated if we do not provide for such special circumstances. My main point is that we need to make it clear what necessitates legislative amendments. I agree with Madam Chair on Article 105 of the Basic Law. That is when we resumed land, this is actually legal. There is a great difference between the actual and expected provisions of the government. This is because there is a certain level of difficulty in resuming land. And I will ask a more detailed when it comes to clause-by-clause examination. I accept the reply given by the administration, but I hope that they will go into greater details during clause-by-clause examination. Otherwise, I thought that all members of Chotong Land would have to agree, but then there is no case law in Hong Kong that requires the consent of all Chotong Land members. As long as the government disperses the payment, then the government is deemed already fulfilling their responsibility. The arrangement among Chotong members are private arrangements. You did not deprive them of such a right. Well, I believe this is the view of Ms. Cameron Kent. Does the Secretary have any reply? No. Thank you. Mr. Chen Xiu-hong. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask about Section 42, Paragraph 1 of the Buildings Ordinance. That is about the exempted applications. The building authority only needs to check whether the construction works are within, are prescribed works within the North Metropolis or are exempted in accordance with Section 42, Paragraph 1. I'd like to know if the government will announce the detailed contents of the exempted works. Say, if only one material or construction method is granted exemption. However, for the remaining parts of the project, of the construction project, there is no exemption whatsoever. The public and the construction sector should have the right to know. They need to know the exact scope of exemptions. I'd like to know if the administration will announce from time to time or on a regular basis the details regarding exemptions. Thank you. Secretary, I'd like to ask the Buildings Department to take this question. Ms. Ng, thank you. Such cases will be scrutinized and approved by a task group. If the applications are considered accepted, then the summary will be uploaded onto the website of the Buildings Department. However, we cannot make public all the contents or information of the project, if it accepts the points of principle. This will allow other applicants to draw reference from such a summary if they want to apply, if they want to make a new application. Say, for example, if they want to facilitate sustainable development to allow a ventilation by making an application for void design, they will benefit from reading the summary online in making an application for their new designs. Mr. Chen, for the adoption of materials and the construction methods, if you are being transparent, then of course you will be bound by proprietary design principles and you are not at liberty to disclose more details. However, if you can make public more information, and this will benefit more people in the industry, this will also fast track some construction projects or infrastructure. So I believe you can go beyond just announcing the principles. You should see how you can make public even more information without infringing copyright. BTRI, CIC, you can consult these organizations and they can definitely drive the sector to adopt more innovative technologies. Thank you. Secretary, you wish to reply? I'd like to add something. Thank you. If the Director of Buildings exercises their powers to approve some certain cases, as the Deputy Director of Building said, we may touch more upon the special features of the case. Once a special case is approved, it will probably form the basis of a code of practice, or it may even become a standard. This will probably add more to the list of permitted use or standards or permitted standards. Then in the future, this new application will not have to take this route from scratch. Thank you. And next, Mr. Hong come in. Just now I referred to Shenzhen River. I discussed it with people in the Chinese mainland before. They pinned high hopes on the Shenzhen River. However, while I was discussing with an official, they said it had nothing to do with me. We are discussing issues of land this time round. It has nothing to do with any water body. However, the Shenzhen River is indeed an important channel or an important corridor, so to speak. I hope this will be incorporated into our discussion. Otherwise, in the future, we may have to come back to discuss this point. Secretary, do you have any reply? At present, I do not, but we can go back and study it. Thank you. Dr. Webster, thank you. I'd like to cite one example, say, regarding low-altitude economy across the two places. On the matter of principle, I'd like to know how dedicated this piece of NM legislation is. Do we need to amend the IRO to tie in with this dedicated legislation, especially for people in the Chinese mainland? They may not know which ordinance to read. They may be reading this dedicated legislation and they may be reading the IRO and they are confused.
When we see that a certain provision will only apply to the NM and our prevailing legislation does not provide the scope for streamlining the process, we will resolve the matter through the dedicated legislation. But when it comes to tax, we leave tax out of the scope of the bill. That is because for any tax break, tax breaks apply to the entire city. We will also have sites for industries outside the NM. Take the central CBD as an example. We're also trying to attract investments and businesses. So, do we simply restrict the concessions to the NM? We try not to box ourselves in, especially in tax. So our plan is to amend the Inland Revenue Ordinance. There will be concessions. So on the criteria that companies have to meet to enjoy the tax concessions, that will be within the framework of the amendment to the IRO. Mr. Lam Chen-sing. I'm on board with the view that we don't have to include every other ordinance in the framework of the bill. For labor importation, for example, we have an existing mechanism. Let's look at the past projects, say building the third runway in Lantau, and also the construction of the Kai-Tak Sports Park. We can refer to the records back in those years. Under the supplementary labor importation scheme, there were many applications for importing workers back in those years. When there's a major project, the Labor Advisory Board also looks at the matter. And then under the construction sector labor importation scheme, that falls under the Development Bureau. There are dormitories for the imported workers. No legislative amendment is needed. The approval happens every quarter. The Development Bureau has the power to decide whether to grant such applications and how many applications to grant based on the situation. So we don't have to include every other ordinance in the framework of this bill. That's my comment. And response, no, that's a comment. I'm the last one to speak. The Northern Metropolis will be very important. All eyes are on the Northern Metropolis. After we examine the principal legislation, we will come to the subsidiary legislation. And this will involve other ordinances, such as the Inland Revenue Ordinance, the Employees Retraining Ordinance, and the Public Order Ordinance. We want tax breaks in the NM. We want a white list to facilitate the flow of personnel in the NM. Outsiders may expect to see everything in the dedicated legislation, but then there are laypersons who don't have business dealings in Hong Kong. They don't see what they are looking for. They don't see tax breaks, for example. So you can prepare a paper. I'm not asking you to answer questions on other bureaus' behalf, but you put all the information in one place. Otherwise, people want tax breaks. They don't see the tax breaks in the bill. The lawyers we know, they can look into the IRO. You have to show people your full plan for the NM. There should be a piece of information where people can see Hong Kong is trying to fully integrate into national development, and the NM is the first stop. So in your papers that go hand in hand with the bill, just then we went into the detail. You have to show people your full plan. Of course, there are practices unique to the common law, but then let's bear in mind our audience may not be legal practitioners. People look at the NM development bill, they may not see everything they have in mind. So, supplementary information or explanation will be needed. In the future, when you announce the information, you also provide the supplementary information so that people will see everything in one place. Because the problem is when you have information scattered across ordinances, people will have to look up different ordinances, for example, the NM bill and the IRO. But the IRO doesn't make reference to the NM specifically. So I invite the government to think about compiling supplementary papers. Outsiders and their legal advisors want to see our full plan. They may not see everything in the bill. I see a detailed reply to the questions raised by the legal advisor. I invite our members to read the questions and the reply. I've extended the meeting. If members have further comments, I can give you a minute. If not, we will start the clause-by-clause scrutiny at the next meeting. I propose not going into clause-by-clause scrutiny since we are in the last few minutes of the meeting. Ms. Khan. The chairperson invited us to read the legal advisor's question and replies, so my suggestion is that at our next meeting, we should get a chance to raise questions on the reply to the questions. And let's also follow up on the matters raised today at the next meeting before we go into the clause-by-clause scrutiny. So that's covered. The legal advisor will alert us to the questions and replies when we come to those clauses. So that's for the record, and that will also lead to greater clarity. So we will get to those points. We will get to that during the clause-by-clause scrutiny. And my point is not just about the provisions, it's to foster public understanding. So can we have supplementary information to foster public understanding? At our next meeting, we will come to the clause-by-clause scrutiny. And on the clauses where the legal advisor raised questions, the legal advisor will let us know. When needed, the legal advisor will state his view during the clause-by-clause scrutiny. During the clause-by-clause scrutiny, please bear in mind that we are not looking at the subsidiary legislation. The preview copy is only for members' reference, and you can make suggestions. There were 42 instances where members asked questions on policy matters. Members spoke for 4 rounds mostly. 1 member spoke for 5 rounds. We also allowed members who did not get to become a member of this Bills Committee to speak. We had a thorough and in-depth discussion. So I adjourn the meeting today unless the Secretary has further remarks to make. So we have concluded the policy discussion here. Next meeting will be the start of our clause-by-clause scrutiny. For our next meeting, it will be on the 21st of August. That's a Friday at 2:30 p.m. We will see you then. Thank you.